Welcome to the debate. Before we jump into today's breakdown, if you enjoy our deep dives, make sure to subscribe to the channel, NFL Nexus. Like the video and, comment on what you thought down below.
Yeah, and hey, if you want to take it a step further, become a channel member and get exclusive content and perks. You just have to click the join button below the video.
Absolutely. So, getting right into it, when structural engineers design a modern mega skyscraper, they don't always distribute the weight evenly across dozens of standard concrete pillars. Instead, they rely on a principle of highly concentrated load bearing.
Right, they use just a handful of those ultra-dense, exorbitantly expensive central columns.
Exactly. It allows them to construct these breathtaking, seemingly impossible glass structures. But there is a terrifying flip side to that architectural marvel.
The fracture risk.
Right? If just one of those core pillars sustains, like a microscopic fracture, the entire building faces catastrophic, instantaneous collapse. And looking at the roster architecture of the 2026 Indianapolis Colts, they have built the absolute football equivalent of that skyscraper.
That is exactly the right framework to view this through. It is the ultimate tension between theoretical load capacity and practical resilience. A structure might look, mathematically flawless on a digital blueprint in a controlled environment.
Sure, on paper.
But when the wind shears hit and the ground actually shifts underneath it, you find out very quickly whether you have built an architectural masterpiece or a multi-billion-dollar hazard waiting for a stiff breeze.
And unpacking that specific tension is our focus today. Drawing on the latest 2026 team reports and the newly released ESPN annual league surveys, we are evaluating this high-variance, all-in strategy from the Colts front office.
It's a massive gamble.
It is, but I look at this blueprint and see a championship window cracked wide open. The underlying metrics and the elite ceilings of their major acquisitions, they prove that when you have top-tier talent, the math simply works in your favor. I'll be arguing that their window is legitimately open.
Whereas I look at the exact same reports and see a front office that is just willfully ignoring the structural fragility of their investments. So I'll be arguing that the compounding injury risks and the exorbitant sunk costs make this roster a precarious house of cards.
So the central question we have to answer today is this. Do the underlying statistical dominance and elite physical traits of the Colts' cornerstone pieces, specifically Sauce Gardner and Jonathan Taylor, do they justify the massive acquisition costs and the inherent injury risks?
Right. Or do the recent executive survey drop-offs and those severe structural dependencies expose a team that is just, teetering on the brink of a systemic collapse?
Exactly. Because you really cannot separate the talent from the cost.
And you definitely cannot separate the player from the system.
Let's start with the philosophy of modern team building. The NFL has fundamentally become a league defined by elite talent at premium positions. Like, the middle class of the NFL is basically disappearing.
It's stars and scrubs, yeah.
Right, and the Colts front office recognized this reality. They executed a strategy predicated on acquiring proven, high-ceiling assets to act as those main load-bearing pillars. Let's look at the acquisition of Sauce Gardner, for instance.
Oh, boy. The 2 first-round picks.
Yes, the draft capital was high. And I know fans look at Sauce missing time last year with that calf injury and immediately panic about what they gave up. But his underlying metrics remain absolutely unimpeachable.
Unimpeachable feels like a pretty massive stretch for a guy who only played, a couple of games?
Well, let's look at what he did in those games, though. We're talking about a player who, despite dealing with a lingering soft tissue injury, posted a league-leading 3.1% pass breakup rate on 293 coverage snaps.
In a very limited sample size.
But he's still finished with a plus 76.9 PFF grade, which ranks 10th best overall among all cornerbacks. When you pair Gardner's isolation ability with Charvarius Ward Sr. on the other side, you give defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo the ultimate press man advantage.
Assuming they are both on the field at the same time.
Let me explain why that matters structurally. Assuming health. In the modern NFL, if your corners can press at the line of scrimmage without safety help, it disrupts the timing of the receiver's route by just a fraction of a second. Buying your pass rush that critical extra half second is literally the difference between a sack and a devastating completion over the middle.
It mathematically tilts the game. I know the theory.
It does. And then that defensive philosophy is perfectly complemented by an offense anchored by Jonathan Taylor, a workhorse who led the league with 18 rushing touchdowns and amassed over 1,500 yards in 2025. It is a formula designed to dictate terms to the opponent.
Okay, but you are describing a theoretical ideal that willfully ignores the reality of the NFL as a war of attrition. The formula you laid out is beautiful on a whiteboard, I'll give you that. But let's look at the practical cost.
The trade compensation.
Yes, the Colts traded 2 first-round picks and 80 Mitchell to the New York Jets for Sauce Gardner. And for that historic ransom, he gave them roughly 2.75 games of action last year. That is a massive, crippling sunk cost.
It was a rough first year, physically.
And it's not just the injury. He has alarmingly dropped from 5th to 9th in the ESPN executive survey. Evaluators aren't just worried about his calf. They are criticizing his tackling, his effort in zone coverage, and the glaring fact that he recorded 0 interceptions in 2025.
Well, I think we need to contextualize those criticisms, though.
Contextualize this. The defense around him is the definition of a house of cards. You mentioned Charvarius Ward Sr. completing this elite press man duo.
A fantastic pairing.
Ward suffered 3 concussions last year. 3. He is literally 1 head injury away from mandatory medical retirement. And it gets worse inside. Because they let Kenny Moore's second walk, they are relying on Justin Wally to step into the slot directly off a torn ACL.
The defense does have injury risks, yes.
This is really the linchpin of your argument. You mentioned his drop in the ESPN survey and the criticism from anonymous evaluators regarding his complete lack of interceptions.
I did, and I want to pull directly from that ESPN survey because the critiques are incredibly specific and honestly, they're scathing. One NFL offensive coach explicitly stated, quote, "Sauce lost the sauce."
Which is quite the soundbite.
It is, but it wasn't just a catchy soundbite. The evaluator pointed out that Gardner is a long strider who relies on his confidence to overshadow his physical weaknesses, but he completely avoids tackling. Specifically, he refuses to clack replace in run support.
Let's break that down for a second, because I think that's a heavily scrutinized area of his game that people misunderstand.
We have to break it down. For anyone unfamiliar with the terminology, crack replace is a non-negotiable run defense responsibility for a cornerback.
Right, it's fundamental.
If a wide receiver blocks down inside on a linebacker or a safety, that block is the crack. The cornerback on the outside has to instantly recognize it, fire forward, and fill the abandoned space on the edge. That is the replace.
You are replacing the run gap.
Exactly. If you don't do it, the running back bounces outside for 20 yards, and Gardner refuses to do it. Plus, when he is asked to play zone coverage, he often plays his leverage incorrectly.
So you're saying it's mechanical, not just physical?
Yes. This isn't just about missing games with a calf injury. It's about a fundamental deterioration in his all-around football mechanics, which culminates in a paltry 3 interceptions over 4 NFL seasons, and literally 0 in 2025. You simply cannot mortgage your franchise's future for a cornerstone defender who is a liability against the run and doesn't take the ball away.
I see why you think that. But let me give you a different perspective. We have to look at what I call the Champ Bailey and Darrelle Revis-Ngology.
Oh, here we go.
Hear me out. Historically, the absolute elite man-cover cornerbacks in the NFL artificially depress their own interception numbers, precisely because offensive coordinators and quarterbacks simply refuse to target them. It becomes a mathematically negative expected value decision to throw in their direction.
But a 0 in the interception column is still a 0.
It is. But you are penalizing Gardner for doing his primary job so effectively that the ball doesn't even come his way. Let's look at a metric that actually tracks his disruption when he is tested. Passes defended.
Okay, let's look at it.
If we look at passes defended since 2022, Gardner has 39. That ties him for second in the entire league with his own teammate, Ward, and they're trailing only Alante Taylor's 40. The value isn't always the turnover. The value is the complete erasure of the opponent's best asset.
I mean, erasure is a strong word when he's sitting on the sideline with a calf issue.
But when he's out there, Lou Anarumo says Gardner completely changes what the defense can do schematically because they never have to offer him safety help. That is the invisible ROI. That isolation allows Anarumo to drop an extra safety into the box or send a 5th rusher.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the cascading effect of his specific limitations? I understand the Revis analogy, but Darrelle Revis was a willing and physical tackler.
True. Revis was great in run support.
If Gardner is on an island, but he is a liability in run support, failing to crack, replace, like we just talked about, offensive coordinators don't have to throw at him to exploit him. They just run right at him. They force him to make business decisions on the perimeter.
Which, to be fair, they did try last year, with mixed results.
Right. But more importantly, let's look at the broader schematic pressure. If the entire premise of Anarumo's defense relies on Gardner shutting down half the field without safety help, it places an unbearable burden on the rest of the secondary.
Well, defensive backs have to cover. That's their job.
Yes, but what happens the moment Gardner needs a schematic adjustment or his calf flares up again? Who are they relying on when that happens? Charvarius Ward is on a 3-year, $54 million contract, yet he missed mandatory minicamp with back tightness.
Back tightness happens in June.
And we cannot gloss over the head injuries. 3 concussions in a single season puts a player on the absolute brink of his career ending. You are building your defensive secondary on a foundation of a player who has openly admitted that the next hit could be his last.
Look, I won't lie. Seeing Ward miss mandatory minicamp made me sweat a little bit. And I am not dismissing the severity of concussion protocols nor the reality of his injury history.
It's a terrifying medical profile.
It is. However, building a team with elite ceilings always requires calculated risk. If you only acquire players with spotless medical histories, you end up with a roster of high-floor, low-ceiling contributors who frankly cannot dictate the terms of a playoff game.
But there's a difference between a calculated risk and a reckless dependency.
Is it reckless if the medical staff clears them and the player feels elite? Let's look at what Ward himself said during OTAs. He stated that he feels spiritually great and noted that he is physically outperforming the younger players in training.
Players always say they're in the best shape of their lives in June.
Furthermore, you brought up the slot corner position with Justin Wally replacing Pro Bowler Kenny Moore second. Yes, Wally is coming off an ACL tear against the Ravens, but modern orthopedic recovery has made the ACL tear far less of a death knell than it was even a decade ago.
It is still major structural knee damage for a position that requires constant pivoting.
True. But playing the slot in Anarumo's defense isn't just about raw straight-line speed or sudden twitch. Head coach Shane Steichen evaluated Wally as highly cerebral. He specifically praised his understanding of leverage.
Leverage is important, sure.
It's everything in this scheme. And for the audience, when we talk about leverage in the slot, we are talking about a defender knowing exactly where his safety help is pre-snap and physically funneling the receiver into that help using his body positioning.
It's a geometry game, basically.
Exactly. Understanding that geometry is arguably more critical than having 2 perfectly healthy knees but poor spatial awareness.
A cerebral understanding of leverage is wonderful, until a 220-pound wide receiver forces you to plant and change direction on a surgically repaired knee on 3rd and short.
He's been cleared, though.
We can talk about modern medicine and geometry all we want, but the physical reality is they let an established, healthy Pro Bowler in Kenny Moore second walk out the door, only to rely on a 2025 third-round pick with a reconstructed knee.
It's a cost-saving move to pay the premium pillars.
But it's a compounding sequence of risks. If Gardner's calf acts up, or if Ward takes an awkward hit in press coverage, or if Wally's knee doesn't hold up to the rigors of an NFL autumn, the defense doesn't just regress gracefully, it shatters. There is no middle ground. There is no depth behind them to absorb the blow.
Well, if the secondary is as fragile and injury-prone as you argue, they cannot afford to be on the field for 40 minutes a game anyway. They need a system to protect them.
Which they don't have.
Which brings us to the ultimate equalizer in the NFL, ball control and offensive certainty. If this defense is designed to play with leads, then we must shift the narrative to the engine that builds and maintains those leads. And that places the entire weight of this franchise squarely on the shoulders of Jonathan Taylor.
Exactly. And that is a terrifying prospect, given his workload.
But look at the results. Taylor has ascended to 5th overall in the ESPN Executive Survey, up from 7th last year. We are talking about a 27-year-old running back who has amassed 69 career rushing touchdowns.
He's been great. Nobody is denying his past production.
Since 2020,
The only human being on Earth with more rushing touchdowns is Derrick Henry, who has 84. Taylor took 323 carries last year. He evolved in the passing game with a career-high 46 catches.
That's a lot of touches.
But when you have a running back who forces defensive coordinators to stack the box with 8 men on early downs, it inherently protects your defense. It grinds the clock. It keeps your defense on the sideline, resting those vulnerable cornerbacks you're so worried about.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You just listed his statistics, 323 carries, 69 touchdowns, as if they are a guarantee of future performance.
They show a proven baseline of dominance.
But in the context of the NFL running back position, those statistics are exactly why he is a massive liability going into 2026.
Wait, because of the usage rate?
Yes. He is 27 years old. He carried the ball 323 times last season alone. That is an astronomical amount of tread taken off the tires for a player entering his late 20s. The human body can only withstand so many collisions in the A-gap.
He's built for it, though.
But more importantly, his 2025 MVP bid was an illusion that was entirely shattered by adversity. You're presenting him as an independent variable, a player who dominates regardless of circumstance.
I'm saying his physical talent forces defenses to adapt entirely to him.
But what actually happened when the environment changed? Once Daniel Jones was injured, the offense collapsed. Taylor failed to eclipse 100 rushing yards in 7 consecutive games.
Because the passing game evaporated.
And what happened in those 7 games? 7 straight Colts losses. He was completely, utterly dependent on the quarterback to function. He couldn't carry the team when they needed him most.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it very differently. I look at Jonathan Taylor like a highly tuned, high-performance engine in a race car.
Okay, I'll bite.
Just because an incredibly powerful engine requires a specific functional transmission to reach its top speed, that does not mean the engine itself is flawed.
But the engine still stalls without the transmission.
Let's break down the mechanics of why that happens in this offense, though. Daniel Jones executing the play-action passing game is that transmission. When Jones fakes the handoff, the threat of him pulling the ball and throwing it over the middle physically freezes the backside edge rusher.
Right, it holds the linebackers.
It holds the middle linebacker in place for just a half second. And that half second is all Taylor needs to hit the second level of the defense. When the transmission broke down due to Jones's injury, the Colts didn't have a quarterback who could threaten downfield.
So they stacked the box.
Exactly. The opposing defenses simply walked 9 men into the box and keyed exclusively on Taylor, knowing they didn't have to respect the pass. No running back can succeed against an unblocked 9th defender.
Sure, the math doesn't work for the run game there.
But the fact that the Colts started the season 8-2 when the system was intact proves that the underlying thesis of their roster construction is sound. When the pieces are on the board, this scheme is virtually unstoppable.
But you don't play the NFL season in a vacuum where the pieces stay neatly on the board. You play it on frozen turf in November and December.
Weather is a factor for every team.
If your high-performance engine fundamentally ceases to function the moment a peripheral component breaks down, you haven't built a resilient vehicle. You've built a luxury item that only works in 72-degree weather.
I definitely wouldn't call a starting quarterback a peripheral component, though.
Fair. Quarterback is central, but the point stands about structural dependency. The ESPN survey highlighted that nearly 30% of Taylor's votes were within the top 3, mostly because evaluators see how special he is in space.
He's lethal in the open field.
But without Jones forcing defenses to back off, Taylor isn't getting to the second and third levels. He is being met immediately in the backfield by that unblocked defender you mentioned.
Which goes back to needing the threat of the pass.
And if the Colts' entire strategy, their vulnerable defense playing with leads, their pass rush getting that extra half second, relies on Taylor establishing the run, and Taylor relies entirely on Daniel Jones staying healthy to keep the box light, do you see the cascading dependency here?
I see the interconnectedness, yes.
The entire multi-million-dollar franchise architecture is balanced on Daniel Jones's health, Jonathan Taylor's rapidly degrading tread, and Charvarius Ward's concussion history.
It is a precarious balance, without question, but I would argue that every single championship team in the modern era is built on a similar tightrope. The margin for error in this league is always razor thin.
But this isn't an exceptionally thin margin.
Perhaps. But to summarize my position on this roster architecture, the Colts' strategy
is conceptually and mathematically justified. When they are healthy, the elite mechanics of Sauce Gardner's coverage isolating half the field, combined with Jonathan Taylor's sheer rushing dominance dictating 8-man boxes, controls the flow of games.
Assuming flawless health, which is rare.
But it validates the front office's aggression. You don't win Lombardi trophies by hedging your bets and building a team of average, durable players. You win them by acquiring elite talent and building intricate schemes that maximize their ceilings.
And to summarize my view, theoretical upside cannot mask practical reality. We can marvel at the mathematical beauty of a 3.1% pass breakup rate or the historical context of 69 rushing touchdowns all day.
They are beautiful metrics.
But exorbitant acquisition costs combined with severe interconnected injury dependencies make this roster far too top-heavy to trust. Whether it's Daniel Jones's availability, Ward's concussions, Gardner's lingering calf issues, or Wally's knee. Over a grueling 17-game season, structural fragility always reveals itself.
I think the one area where we unequivocally converge today is the recognition that the 2026 Indianapolis Colts possess perhaps the highest variance roster in the entire National Football League.
Without a doubt.
Their floor is total structural collapse, and their ceiling is an AFC South championship and a deep playoff run. They are completely, fundamentally reliant on the interconnected health of a few cornerstone pieces.
We absolutely agree there. It is a fascinating case study in the inherent complexities of modern NFL roster building. It highlights that delicate, almost agonizing balance between mortgaging the future for elite, game-breaking talent and attempting to maintain a durable, weatherproof foundation.
And as the summer progresses, all eyes of the football world should be intensely focused on the upcoming training camp at Grand Park Sports Complex.
I'll definitely be watching.
That is where we will finally see how these theories, these medical valuations, and these positional dependencies actually manifest on the grass.
Exactly. Because the digital blueprints and the executive surveys only tell us what people think will happen. The physical realities of training camp, like the one-on-one drills and the live tackling, will tell us what is actually happening.
Returning to where we began, it seems the Colts have indeed built a spectacular glass-walled skyscraper. The blueprints are brilliant, the materials are elite, and the view from the top is absolutely unparalleled.
Until the wind picks up.
Right. Because as the autumn winds prepare to howl, we are left with one lingering, unavoidable question. Will the pillars hold? Thank you for joining us on The Debate.